Welcome to Eat Well, Travel Better, the Business of Food Travel podcast with Eric, Wolf, and Ashi Vale, where we help you become a better industry professional by gaining inspiration from some of the world's most successful people in the food and beverage tourism industry. With each episode, we meet these leaders and examine their secrets of success. We reveal the obstacles and challenges they have faced, along with their solutions and triumphs, and give you ideas and inspirations for many of the same business issues that you may be facing as well. And now for today's episode. Welcome. I'm Eric Wolf, and I'll be your host today for episode 33 of Eat Well, Travel Better, the Business of Food Travel podcast. And joining me today is co-host Ashi Vale. Today we'll be speaking with Philip Ruskin. Philip has worn many hats in his 30-year career in communications, namely as a syndicated television producer, entertainment marketing executive, event producer, and since 2002 as the owner of Ruskin International, a New York-based communications and marketing firm specializing in food, hospitality, and travel clients. Philip has represented clients such as Chef Anthony Bourdain, Chef Amanda Cohen of Dirt Candy, The Chocolate Show, Mexican Haas Avocado Board, Serrano Ham Board, Israel Dairy Board, Verona Chocolate, Louisville, Kentucky CBB, and Champagne, France, to name a few. Ruskin was an adjunct professor at New York University and is currently an instructor at ESSEC Business School in Paris, France, where he now resides. He is also an avid drummer. Welcome, Philip.
Thank you. Well, thanks for having me. Hi, Eric. Hi, Ashi.
Hi, Philip. Welcome to our podcast. My goodness, you were an actor, a producer in marketing. Can you tell us about your journey that led you into food?
Well, I started as an actor, and I was doing some what they call day player, right? So or background, So when there are these crowds or people walking past a storefront, and they say, "Okay, action, background." And I was one of those people. And then sometimes I would be a stand-in for Woody Allen. And if somebody freezes the frame on Hannah and her sisters, they'd also see me as the waiter. So I did that for a few years while I was driving a school bus for handicapped children and a limousine. And had people like the Rolling Stones and Mel Torme and some really cool people. And then I met somebody who was a video producer at my optician. He was telling me about the videos he was producing. He was about to produce some dance videos, modern dance videos, and said he was looking for somebody to help him produce it. And we kind of hit it off. And he said, "Well, you seem like somebody, I get along with." I jumped at the opportunity. And so that was how I moved from acting into producing. Then I went on to produce for the Dr. Ruth show, the talk show, for about 5 years, and then got into entertainment marketing. And that's kind of where I started getting my foot in the pool of the food world, because we had clients like Diet Pepsi, Nestle, and we would do tours, promotional tours that were sponsored. We would be tasked with coming up with concepts and then taking them on the road. For example, for Pepsi, right, we had to work with the local distributors, the local retailers, and tie them into these promotions we did. It was called the "You Got the Right One, Baby, Make Your Own Video" contest. And it was really exciting. Ray Charles is one of the judges on it. So we took this sort of little video, kind of a mini TV set, if you will, all compact, where we just plant it in a college campus or in an event, right? It could be in the food court. Often people would make their videos and then win all kinds of cool stuff. Then after doing that, the company I was with, we were then also doing marketing for talent. So I went on the road a lot with Larry Bud Melman, who was a sidekick of David Letterman. And we would go and people would take us to amazing meals. And that was one of the times when I would really travel the country and really start to get a taste, right, literally and figuratively, of America with Larry Bud, right? So obviously it was not only delicious, but a lot of fun. And then the company I was with decided they were going to go more into IT, right? And I decided, a lot of people were moving in that direction. This is around mid-90s, right? And late 90s. And I decided I wanted to be doing something that was more high touch rather than high tech, and something at the Food from France, the French government's Ministry of Agriculture has a branch that promotes the food and wine of France. And they needed somebody who was French speaking. And that was kind of my first real deep dive into the food world. It was based on, it was like, hey, I've never done this. I like food, I like chefs, and I speak French. That's how I got into the world of food and wine.
Well, Philip, you couldn't have landed in a better country right now if you're French speaking and born in France as well, I understand, and having worked in the marketing of French food and drink, and here you are now living in Paris. I mean, that sounds kind of like a perfect situation.
It is. I feel very at home. I've come here often over the years because I have family. My wife is French. And as you point out, I was born here, so I have relatives, I have lifelong friends. So I've been coming enough that I've really have a lot of contact, a real sort of almost roots, if you will. And so I feel very at home here. The French sensibility suits me. Even being surrounded, Nashi, you would know this in San Francisco, and you, Erica, in London, being surrounded by beautiful architecture and this sensibility, which is in the food, in the artisan produce, in just even the structures, even the architecture of the city. I think being surrounded by so much beauty is just good for the soul. It's just something that's not only very pleasurable, but I think very helpful.
The French quality of life, that's something that's world renowned. I think a lot of people strive to experience that. They don't emulate it themselves.
I agree. And here's an interesting thing, Eric, is that what you're describing, right? That quality. I've had experiences collaborating with French people who then moved to the United States, and they have sort of, I want to say, an entrepreneurial spirit that's a bit more, I guess, promoted, or just maybe a bit more encouraged in North America. Certainly a lot of places, but it's the quality that's very encouraged in North America. And they come with this French sensibility, what you described as that savoir-faire, that attention to quality and bringing all of that history. That combination of the French sensibility and the American entrepreneurial spirit, in my experience, what I've witnessed, it has been a really, really successful combination. All of the people I've worked with who've come from France to the US and brought both of those worlds together, sort of woven those qualities together, have done extraordinary things and have done extraordinarily well doing them.
Philip, I'd like to dig into that a little bit more, that sense of entrepreneurship that you have. You mentioned that every job you've had has come into use. And it's such a wonderful way of thinking about life and careers, because people tend to think there's just one career for them, but you take the best of every opportunity you get and somehow it lands you in the path you need to be on. So can you tell us a little bit about what you meant by that and how it has come to use for you?
Something that I mention also when I teach, my classes, because a lot of times people are on a career track, which is a wonderful thing, right? They have a very clear idea of this is what they want to do. And they have this sense that, well, if I don't do that, then, I will have failed. Or if they move, or if they switch jobs, or they do something else, they feel, well, gee, I couldn't hack it at that. And something that I mention is that I truly believe that everything one does, one acquires skills, experience, certainly contact, that can be very useful. To give you a real life example from my experience, having worked in television. So I produced these segments for Dr. Rousseau, and this was in the days before people like segment producers had computers. Only the executive producer, the head producer had computers. The rest of us used a telephone. And we actually had to go meet with people, like in the movies when people are journalists are like running down a scoop in a story. You just literally, you make an appointment, you meet people, you ask people things, you talk to people. So all of the things that went into producing the show. Then when I found myself working in food, one of the first projects that I really had, or that I really worked on, was somebody approached me when I was working for the French government, right? That was my very first food job, and said, hey, I've been approached by this group. They're putting on the chocolate show. They want to mount it in the US. And they only had 3 months. They had hired some people who dropped the ball. It was a real panic. It's like, how are we going to do this in 3 months? So my colleague and I, who ended up working together, said, we'll do it. And so literally almost every aspect of my career up until then came into play. So producing an event. So I had to book talent, right? Chefs. I had to get chefs. I had to come up with a plan, an itinerary of like, okay, well, what am I going to have them do? They can't all just do the same thing. They can't all just, I also didn't even want them to just all cook, right? So I used my skills of research, getting on the phone, talking to people. How do you put together a show? Well, very much the way you put together a television show. So rather than just reach out to chefs, I did reach out to some chefs, right? Exceptionally good chefs. Many who then went on to become extremely famous. One actually became the White House pastry chef for 8 years. But I also reach out to people in other areas, right? So I reached out to a guy named John Scharfenberger, who had just created chocolate. Well, that's Scharfenberger's chocolate. He's actually from your neck of the woods, Ashi. He's from San Francisco. I reached out to John Harney, who Harney Teas. And John Harney, nobody had ever asked him to do anything like that. So I said, hey, Mr. Harney, can you do a segment? I called them segment. Can you do a segment on tea and chocolate? So a number of people somebody from academia. I reached out to Marion Nessel, who created the food studies program at NYU. I said, Dr. Nessel, could you do something about chocolate and society and culture? So I got all these cool people, lined it up very much like you would a TV show, like, okay, we can't put two people together who are too close in theme and that sort of thing. And then we had a few different stages. There was lighting. There was all of the production, right, that one would have in television. And then something that in television, and when I was doing promotional tours, that really served me, and I think I was able to develop because I didn't have Google as a crutch, was this resourcefulness, right? Like, how do I get that, right? If I don't, and if I figure, like when you Google something, well, everybody can find the same thing. But when you really like start asking people, start researching, rolling up your sleeves, often you can do a deep dive and come up with stuff that other people aren't gonna. So that came in handy, that sense of research and being resourceful. How are we gonna get, here's an example. I wanted to have lots of bling at the chocolate show. So I wanted to have lots of chocolate sculptures. We had chocolate dresses, right? Chocolate fashion, which is something they initiated in France. And they tasked us with, okay, we'll find American designers. And so we did, and we paired them with American-based pastry chefs. And together, the designer and the pastry chef created these chocolate fashions. We actually had a runway show.
I have to ask, how did you keep it from melting?
Good question. That's a good question. A lot of people ask that. They treat the chocolates. You can't eat the chocolate that these models are wearing, or the accessories. Sometimes there were amazing hats, pocketbooks, right? Things that jewelry, and then even dresses. But they would treat it so that it would not melt. However, it's a very good question. There were instances where it did. There was one TV show came and they covered this one model, this one pastry chef, this one designer, and they shot. And by the end of the shoot, before she went out on the runway, it did melt to the point where it wouldn't hold together. So it was disappointing, right? There was like a big disappointment, but that was part of the fun and the drama of the segment. And then there were contacts that I was able to call on. My favorite moment, because we weren't sure, like, is this going to work? Are people going to want to come to this thing? And we showed up the morning of the opening of the chocolate show, 1998, and we see literally a line that went all the way around the block, literally around the block. So at that point, we all sighed relief. We knew, okay, this is going to work. I had put a lot of the chocolate pieces at the front, the ones that I felt were most TV friendly, most visually. And again, that's something that I had developed working in TV, that visual sensibility. We had a chocolate bustier, right? Like this very sexy lingerie on a model, not a human model, but a storefront model. And it was by Thierry Mugler, I remember. And Dr. Ruth only had I had invited her. I said, Ruth, why don't you come to the opening? So she shows up and I put her, right, I had her stand. I mean, it was just one of these things that when she walked in, I saw Ruth, I saw the bustier, and I said, Ruth, stand here next to the chocolate bustier. So she goes, okay. So we opened the doors. Now, I hadn't planned for Dr. Ruth to be the face of the chocolate show, but I just said, Ruth, she shows up. I go, stand here. I'll be right with you. We opened the doors to the media, to the press. So all these cameras, all these TV, and all pour in, right? And what do they see? They see Dr. Ruth standing by a chocolate, really sexy bustier. So also they rush over to her with cameras and they go, microphones. They go, Dr. Ruth, what's the difference between chocolate and sex? And without missing a beat, Ruth goes, well, you can have chocolate all the time. And that became the moment, right? That was the soundbite that launched the chocolate show and went international. And then from then on, every day there would be things that would come up or opportunities to make it better. Ashi, to your question about applying things that I'd learned, having worked in sponsored tours, I had a lot of dealings with sponsors, right? Obviously, right? We dealt with Nestle, with Diet Pepsi, with some spirits companies, with Stolichnaya, with Grey Goose. And so the chocolate show, we had 3 months to sell the show, right? To fill it up with chocolate sponsors. So going after people like Mars and Perugina and, all these, and then many artisanal, Valrhona chocolate, many European chocolates. I found that I was able to understand what made them tick. And when I was pitching them, when I was selling them on the show or talking to them rather about the show, I was able to ask them, what would make this work for you? We're going to produce this. We're going to make this experience, to use a slightly overused word, together. What would make it successful for you? And out of those conversations came my ability to, me and my partners coming back to them saying, okay, well, this is what we'll do. This is what we can do. This is how we can work with the chefs and all of these other assets that we have and make this even better for you. And this is what we would like you to do. And that's how we were able, 3 months, to basically get enough sponsors to make it happen.
Philip, it's kind of serendipitous that you were working again in chocolate because, as I understand it, your first food travel memory, or maybe your favorite one, was when you were visiting a chocolate factory when you were 11 years old in Buenos Aires.
Yes, that's right. And that's right. I think, thinking on it, that probably is where the root of my chocolate obsession. That's right. I went to Buenos Aires often because my grandmother lived there. I have family that's French, but some had moved to Buenos Aires, Argentina, which is how I came to speak Spanish. I have a cousin whose family owned this chocolate factory. And so one day they said, oh, listen, how would you like to go visit the factory? I had no idea what I was in for. And it really was Willy Wonka. I mean, for an 11-year-old you walk into a place and the aroma of rich, thick aroma that's wafting through the entire factory and all of these big vats and people, and the people that were like really happy to be there, right? They would seem to be enjoying their job, and that went from machine to machine to machine, seeing how the chocolate was made, how it was conked, and how it was then processed. And then out comes these bonbons, and they sent me home with 2 large shopping bags filled to the brim with chocolate. Chocolate's been a good friend ever since.
So it must have made an indelible mark on your memory then, that entire experience.
Absolutely, totally. And Argentina, I mean, they have a very rich food culture, as you know, besides steak and these barbecues that are, as many cultures have, they have their own form, which is a very specific type of barbecue. I don't know if you've ever seen those. It's called an asado, and they have this contraption that has like a pulley with a crank, and you crank it so that you can lower or raise the grill, right, which is upright, and then you raise it down over the coals or up so that you can adjust the heat. And it's a real, as are many barbecues internationally, right, globally, an art form. That was something which I remember, because it takes a day, right? So you spend literally a day outside around this asado where people are sharing memories and getting reacquainted and preparing the meal. Right, my grandmother had chicken, so fresh eggs, all of that. So that was really much a culinary awakening.
You're a kindred spirit when it comes to chocolate, because I remember commuting from the South Bay to San Francisco a few years ago. And my favorite part of the commute would be when I landed at Millbrae Station, because Guittard, which is one of my favorite cooking chocolate companies, had a factory right there. So you would step out of the train and be enveloped in this like chocolate, sweet-smelling chocolate air, which was just wonderful.
Philip, I loved the chocolate in Argentina story, and I understand that you also had a pretty special experience in Ireland as well. Would you tell us about that?
When I was in my teens, I went traveling with my brother, and we went to the Aran Islands, and we went to Ireland, which was probably the friendliest country I'd been to, and still one of the friendliest countries I've ever been to. And on the Aran Islands, we found ourselves in a pub at night, and it was filled with people, and they were all singing in Gaelic. or Irish, and playing music, right? Having a session and drinking and eating. And we couldn't communicate with us. They may have spoken English, but they were communicating and singing in Gaelic that night. But nonetheless, they bought us pint after pint, gave us food, and sang and would look at us, turn to us, and they all erupt in laughter. And we laughed, even though we didn't know what they were saying, but it was clearly fun. And the whole evening, we basically spent an evening laughing and singing with people in a language that we did not know. But it was the food and the drink that we shared that was the thread that connected us. And it was a magical evening. We left and floated, that a culture would let us in and that would invite us and would share with us and make us part of that magical experience.
What a wonderful memory. So literally food and drink get people to connect in a way that so many other activities may not.
And song,
it's
don't
just
forget
wonderful
the song.
to hear that. And the
song.
And
That's
was
right.
it dancing too, Philip?
It wasn't dancing like you see in the movies where they get up and do, but they were like clacking their feet while they were sitting, like
Okay.
almost. It was almost like dancing seated. But it's interesting what you point out, Eric, is because you're right. Song and food and drink are probably, I mean, there may be other things, but three of the experiences that allow people to communicate non-verbally, right, without knowing the language.
Yeah, they're manifestations of culture. We look at this when we teach food tours and we talk about how cuisine is a manifestation of culture, and we compare that to other types of culture, whether it's humor, dress, song, literature, architecture, and so on. This is our culture.
Very good. You're absolutely right.
Join us around the 15th of every month for Food Travel Talk TV, our new live online talk show dedicated to the food and beverage travel trade. Every month, we invite thought leaders, opinion makers, and trendsetters to discuss important topics for the benefit of our industry. The show is designed to inspire us with ways to help each other do business better. You can peruse upcoming shows and register in the event calendar on our website.
I saw your quote with, you said Salvador Dali said beauty should be edible or not at all, and I love that.
Yes, it's part of there's a couple ways to interpret that and it's not a quote that's an inspiration, right? It's not the kind of thing that I frame and put over my desk, but it's something that I appreciate because, for one thing, it's whimsical, and I'm a big believer in being serious, being professional, but injecting whimsy, which is not to be snarky, but just really a sense of whimsy, which is more like a way of living, if you will. And I think Dali had that, this sort of whimsy. To me, beauty should be edible or not at all is either Dali being real surrealist, saying, everything beautiful, if you can't eat it, why bother? So that's Dali in terms of pleasure. And it could also be him saying to people who vest too much importance on just superficial things, right? People who think that, well, it has to be aesthetically beauty, it has to look beautiful, right? And they're just looking at the surface of things. On one level, that quote to me is Dali saying to those people, no, beauty is all of the things that we consume, that we take in, that help us grow, that make us better and stronger, right? It's everything that we experience. And if it doesn't enrich us, if it's not really going to add, and it's just superficial, then why bother?
No, I totally agree. And I love that way of looking at it.
I think everything's edible. I mean, in terms of, and I don't mean literally that you ingest it, but everything that we interact with, that we do, we take in, and we, in some sense, digest it, right? And then it becomes part of us, and then it makes us grow, it makes us stronger, it makes us, gives us pleasure, it makes us learn and understand things. So we're really always, I think, to me, food. I don't really. People say, "Oh, gee, are you foodie?" and talk about being a foodie. I don't. I work in food. I have for years. I wouldn't use that as a label, right? Say, oh, hey, I'm a foodie. Because to me, it's a bit too focused, or it's so focused, I should say. I shouldn't say too, right? Because some people are way into food, and that's okay. But for me, to be just focused on, well, what you can eat. To me, what we eat and drink, and certainly that's why food tourism and what you all do, to me, it is about all of the things, and I know Eric speaks about this often in the association. It's everything that goes with it, everything that's associated with it. And that's one element, often a very, very key element. But without the other parts, it has much less value than it does when it's the sum of the parts is so much stronger, much more, I think, to me, valuable than on their own.
Philip, when you were saying about something being edible and that kind of being part of your persona growing up, that becoming a part of your everyday life, I'd like to talk a little bit more about how we get our customs and behaviors. And you were saying something about how a PR colleague of yours used to say, "It's my pleasure," in order to say, "You're welcome."
Mhm.
I think that is absolutely the best way to say something like that, to give gratitude. I know whenever someone says no problem, it absolutely drives me crazy because it
Uh,
implies that other things are a problem. When I lived in South Africa, that is where I first heard people say it a lot. And I thought, wow, there is no better way, absolutely no better way to say you're welcome than to say it's my pleasure. I mean, how gracious is that?
I agree. I used to associate it with, because there's a lot of, as with many phrases and terms, as you pointed out in some of your work, like experience, they're words that then get co-opted, overused, and then their value, their power diminishes a little bit. And so to me, I associated it originally, oh, my pleasure, with speaking to somebody, maybe a customer service representative who would sort of say mechanically be reading a script. It's my pleasure. We're here to serve you. And then I had a colleague who's a terrific, terrific PR professional, really, and a terrific person. And one time we were chatting and I thanked her for something. And she goes, my pleasure. And she said it and she meant it. I just had this aha. I was like, wow, she really, it really is her pleasure. She really, really means that it was really a pleasure. It was really, for her, it had value. It was an exchange that would happen. It wasn't me to one person doing a favor for another, so now that person owes that person a favor. And so after that, I realized, okay, well, that, as you said, Eric, that is a real gracious way of saying this relationship's important. What we're doing, what we're interacting is important to me, even though you're getting something, but I'm getting something out of it because I'm helping you. I tell people in the classes, and I've often told other people, that Danny Meyer's book, Setting the Table, should be required reading because, in my opinion, is his philosophy is that he is a person who captures that, because to him, his company is all about customers, about taking care of people and having it be a pleasure. And it's worked very well for him.
Philip, how do you feel about no problem?
That's a good question, Eric. I think to me, no problem is one of those terms that's a cliche, that is just a script. It feels to me like a scripted term. And as you pointed out, I agree that it means it could be a problem. It doesn't feel as if it's connected to an interaction. When it's something's pleasurable to me for doing something that may have helped you, there's an exchange going on between Philip and Eric, Philip and Ashi, right? And no problem feels to me one way, like, hey, and it's got kind of dismissive, like, yeah, sure, yeah, whatever. To me, Eric, it feels like whatever.
Yeah, it's a statement rather than a dialogue.
Exactly. Uh-huh. And dialogue that's what you all are training people at and focusing on, it is about a dialogue. Travel, food, it's all about the dialogue. You've pointed out that it's sitting around right at a table and exchanging. If people aren't exchanging, and that's something that I think the less scripted people get, because often you see people will be advised, well, when you have visitors, when you have travelers, say this or say that. And when it is scripted as whatever and no problem, it's just a phrase that you just throw at people. Once it stops being interactive, it stops being experiential, and then it just becomes ersatz.
In addition to sincerely saying, it's my pleasure, what are some of the things you've learned that you wish you knew back in the day?
Well, I've had clients that I took on because I figured, okay, well, I need to, and then found that they just didn't work for whatever reason. If I had known earlier on that it is important to curate, just as you curate an experience, just as you curated a tour, just as you curate anything that you do, it's important to curate one's client so that they fit and so that they are consistent with your values and what works for you. And I think early on, a lot of people have this sense that, well, gee, it's a client, so I have to do everything. I have to bend over backwards. I have to really make them happy because that's my job. And yes, it's one's job, but it's also one's job to be happy and to make sure it works for you too. So it's a two-way street. And then when I kind of got that, then if it didn't work, I would just tell clients that I would recommend, or I'd say, I think you'd probably be better served working with somebody who can do X, Y, Z for you better than I can.
Philip, if no problem is not the most gracious way to say you're welcome, there certainly have to be other things that annoy you in business. What might some of those things be?
Something that I find irritating both in business and every day is people who either say or have this attitude, have a response, which is, oh, that's not my job. Something needs to be fixed, or you want to get to a solution. And well, that's not their area. And okay, it may not be their area. Maybe there's someone else but then tell me who that person is. How can we work together to fix it or to get to a yes? One of the first times that I experienced this response of, oh, that's not my job, I was at Le Havre and I was getting a train ticket and I wanted to get a schedule for also the hovercraft and the trains. So I'm waiting on the line to get my train ticket. I get to the front. The clerk says, I get there and I say, hi, okay, well, how much is a ticket? Okay, I'll take one. And can you tell me what time does the hovercraft leave? And the woman looks at me as if I had asked her something so offensive. And she says to me in French, she goes, that's not my job. Do I look like I work for the hovercraft? And so that sense of, well, I can't help you, or being offended because somebody asked you something, is something that I just find just inexcusable. If you can say, well, I don't know, but that's not my job, means I only have a very specific job. And if you expect me to do anything that's outside of that, even 1 millimeter, forget about it.
And she probably knew anyway, exactly, but just couldn't be bothered.
You're absolutely right, Eric. Absolutely. And I see that from time to time. And yes, sometimes people will do it just because whatever, maybe they're not thrilled with their job and they feel they're taken advantage of. So I understand there's reasons why people may be not forthcoming. And that's something which I think goes with what we were talking about before about working, interacting. They're not really interacting, they're just answering. And if you ask them something that's not in their list of prompted or scripted questions, then forget it.
They shouldn't be in a hospitality job then.
That is true. That's true. And that's something that, again, going back to Danny Meyer, now I never worked for him. I'm not promoting, but I hold him up as somebody who really promotes and espouses, right, that quality. And it's something which I think the industry, globally, I'm speaking now, could use more of. I mean, I'm sure you see it, Eric, in your work in terms of a region or destination lacking hospitability or the art of welcoming. And it's something, I don't know why that is. I don't know if we've become so high tech. Were people more before, or is it just something that people need to work at? Why do you think that is? Or maybe you don't agree. Maybe you think that it's not an issue. But in terms of the hospitality and travel industry globally, being able to use some improvement, a room to improve, I guess.
There's so many reasons. It could be generational, it could be cultural, it could be upbringing. Who can say? And I don't think you could really say it's one country or culture that does this, because you see it happen all over the world.
I agree. I know a fellow who made a career out of, I'm sure there are many people who do this, right? But he actually works with destinations specifically on that, to help them on their customer service, right? The sense of, French call it accueil, which is interesting because I don't know if there's the welcome, but it's interesting because in French, l'accueil, right? The welcome. It's almost like in a sense, it's the art of the welcome, l'accueil. And he works with people. He's American, actually. Works with people with destinations specifically to help them work on that, on how to be friendly or how to have a more positive traveler engagement. I think that's a great thing.
Philip, it's been such a joy hearing about your life and listening to your stories. I would love to hear what you're currently reading right now, and if you have any favorites and why.
Well, there's a book I read, I finished, called All the Light We Cannot See. Brilliant book. It's a historical fiction. It follows the parallel lives of two young people, two teens. One is a blind French girl, and one is a young man who's 16, 17 years old, who's been conscripted in the German army. It's during World War II. And the entire book moves to these two lives are moving to a point where they will intersect. And it shows how people's lives in 1 second, an entire life, can come together and how we affect each other. And it's absolutely brilliantly written, probably one of the most brilliant voices in modern literature that I've read. in the long time.
Did they turn it into a movie?
I'm sure they will. I'm surprised. It's a good question, Eric, because I'm a little surprised that they haven't yet. Maybe people are battling for the rights. I don't know, but and the other thing is with books that are so rich in the language, where the rich language is so much part of the pleasure of the book, it's really hard to adapt that faithfully into a movie. Yes, it can have a very interesting plot and it can be well written script, but I don't know how they would capture the literature. But if it were, I'd see it.
Well, they always say the book is never the same as the movie, so I guess we can't keep it to the same standards.
That's right.
Well, Philip, we need to wrap up, but I would really like to thank you for taking the time today. You are a very interesting guy. I have always enjoyed our conversations, and I can't wait to meet you in Paris, and I would love you to show me some of your favorite chocolate shops there.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, no, I'd love to, Eric. Yeah. And I've been discovering a bunch. So I've got quite an itinerary. That and then we can do chocolate and then some. We can expand it to other sweets, maybe even some pastry.
I love it. My own private food tour with a food expert. Thank you, Philip.
Absolutely. Thank you, guys. Thanks, Ashi. Thank you, Eric. That was fun.
Our pleasure.
Thank you, Philip.
Thanks for listening today. The Eat Well, Travel Better podcast is brought to you by the World Food Travel Association, the world's leading authority on food and beverage tourism. Our mission is to preserve and promote culinary cultures through hospitality and travel. By doing so, we empower local communities and entrepreneurs with the knowledge and tools needed to reach new food lovers and gain a competitive edge. Founded in 2003, now each year we shepherd a community of 200,000 professionals in more than 100 countries. Connect with us on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Instagram. And you can learn more about us, subscribe to our newsletter, and join our family at worldfoodtravel.org. Until next time, eat well and travel better.